In this episode of Real Impacts, we're aiming to bring harmony and understanding to an age-old challenge, the generational divide. I'm joined by generational researcher Josephine Hansom, and we seek to understand how we got here, the labels we applied, and what it means today in the workplace. We explore who are the auditors, who are the purpose seekers, and in this post-COVID AI world, who wants to lead anyway? Is hybrid working all it's cracked up to be? Are Gen Z lazy? And what is the incivility spiral? But this isn't just theory. We also look at practical ways to trigger harmony in the workplace that future-proofs organisations. This is a generation-spanning episode. Let's get into it. Josephine, welcome to Real Impacts, and thank you so much for joining me today. So today we are talking about the generational divide, and specifically the generational divide in the workplace. Big topic. Before we get into it, could you just introduce yourself and tell me a bit about what you do, please?
Yeah, of course. And I guess to start with, thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. So I'm Josephine Hansom and I'm a researcher. So I've been a researcher for the last 20 years. But I guess increasingly nowadays, I'm becoming more of a storyteller. My research focuses on the next generation, whether that be back in the day, the next generation were millennials. Currently, the next generation in the workplace are Gen Z, but we also have Generation Alpha and the brand new Generation Beta, who the first were born this year, so they're not even 1 year old. And I guess where I stand is in between, say, business leaders and brands and young people to help kind of dispel the myths that many people have about young people and help businesses future-proof their products and services by better understanding the next generation.
So I'm going to slightly go off scripts straight away here, but I'm just picking up on something you said. So you spoke about a lot of your research focuses on the next generation, which is essentially the current young generation.
Absolutely, correct? Yes, yep.
So what do you do any work, or do great businesses look at the next generation? So yes, we've got Generation Z as young people in the workplace now, but what about the next lot coming through and sort of preparing in readiness for them?
Absolutely. So it's a really interesting space when you think about the workplace, because I think some people still think millennials are young in the workplace. So that's just
we are.
A little. Some think so. But Gen Z, they're approaching 30 this year. So that they're, I guess, technically the young ones who are in their 20s. And maybe the sort of the top end of the teens. But Generation Alpha, who are coming through, who are currently sort of all in sort of education, they're interesting because they're still developing, and knowing what they're going to be like in the workplace is actually really hard. What we know about them is more the context that surrounds them, which is actually how you define a generation. A lot of people think generations are about ages, and they are to some extent, but they're as in based on when you were born. But what makes each generation different is what is happening to them economically, socially, in the technology that is the context of their life. And so when we're thinking about Generation Alpha or Beta, who, as I say, have just been born, we can't necessarily say what they're going to be like in the workplace, but we can talk about the environment that they're going to be moving into.
Okay. And just to sort of strip it right back, looking at generational labels, we spoke about this when we caught up before. So I'm a millennial. I was born in the late 80s.
Such a millennial.
But I've only started to sort of identify with that and use that label perhaps over the last maybe 4 or 5 years or so. Because if I cast my mind back to when I was in my 20s, early 20s, I don't remember there being such a big discourse around generations and you're this X generation or what, this or that. It was more like older people and younger people.
Yeah.
And like, I've spoken to a few people, and that seems to be a lot of people's recollection of like that time, so like 10 years ago or so. Well, no, maybe a little more than 10 years ago. So what's driven that change in this more realization and identifying different generations?
I would say that not to challenge your experience of being millennial back 10 years or more ago, but I think that that's when it all did start.
Yeah.
It may have started more so in America than it did in the UK, but that's when I started, I guess, researching and studying young people. That's when the internet just became full of generational theory. Young people were called snowflakes, if you remember. People still called Gen Z snowflakes, which I think is interesting that they're labelling a generation while actually describing a life stage. But we'll get on to life stage versus generation later. But I think that the generational theory has become more prevalent because it's easier to understand. It's a shorthand for lots of things. The issue is that shorthand means lots of different things to different people. So a millennial or someone who's Gen Z might seem like a positive thing to one person, but it might seem a negative thing to another. So it's a useful category, but it's not a good definition.
So what's within that category?
Of millennial or Gen Z? Or just generally?
No, sorry, that was a wrong question. What is within the term generation? What does that signal?
Well, it signals the world that a person born at a specific time has experienced. So millennials, for example, that would be things like the economic crash, that would be things like 9/11, that would be things like austerity if you're in the UK. If you're Gen Z, that might be things like the pandemic, that might be things like AI. Similar to both would be social media, which of course Generation X, which came before millennials, didn't have. You know, they started their working life without the internet. They may have started with an email, but they certainly didn't have a laptop or the flexibility that we see today. So it's about the experiences those people had during their life, not the age that they are. Because there are things that a 40-year-old today would be similar to a 40-year-old 50 years ago, or a teenager today, a teenager 50 years ago. There are similarities in terms of age, but it's how you experience that life that causes the differences between each generation.
And to play devil's advocate on that, so everyone in all generations would experience, if they're alive, would experience those same things. So is there a point in time in your age where they have a bigger impact?
Well, they say that time moves much more slowly when you're young. So those kind of teenage years may only be a handful, but you remember them for the rest of your life. While you might have 5 years, I don't know, between your 20s and 30s, and it's a bit of a blur. It's like, doesn't mean anything. So they're very formative. And so that's why they're so important, because you figure out who you are, you figure out what you want, you figure out what your voice is, you figure out a lot about yourself that later on in life you take for granted, and you're just building on top of the things that you already understand. So arguably what you experience when you're young, to discover who you are, to discover how you work also, because that is something that you build upon for the rest of your life as well as your identity, are really the foundations that will then continue to shape the rest of your life.
What are the main differences between millennials and Gen Z?
It's easier to talk about them in the workplace, because I think actually outside of work there's probably a tendency for millennials to still want to be young and, I guess, dress young and not necessarily want to look old. It's probably the better way of looking at it. Not want to appear old, rejecting the aging process, as many of us are. But in the workplace, there is a real pronounced difference between Gen Z and millennials. I talk about millennials in the workplace as like the purpose seekers. They're interested in what's going on, why it's happening, how they can contribute, how they can also do things differently and make things better, not just in terms of values, but also in terms of processes and assumptions, and sort of rebuilding some of the architecture that say the boomers created back in the day, and remaking things. So if you look at things like, I don't know, like Monzo, that's really interesting, or Depop. They're reimagining things that were already existing, like banks and eBay, but doing it for the new generation and doing it differently and doing it their way that felt more meaningful. While when I talk about Gen Z in the workplace, I talk about them being the auditors, because they're not necessarily changing things up like millennials did. What they're doing is they are watching what's going on around them and trying to figure out what the contract is at work and whether it's worth it for them, because they've joined the workplace at a time where literally everything is up in the air. They've joined when we were working at home in a pandemic, that you didn't even go to an office. And when the office sort of opened up again, how often do you go in, and do you see colleagues all the time? And what are the rules there? And they asked, and everyone said, I don't know what the rules are, actually. And they are doing work from home and getting feedback, often written feedback, not the kind of osmosis feedback that you get in the office. So they're not learning, I guess, those soft skills about what's expected at work, what you need to do to deliver to a standard that people want. It's very transactional what they're experiencing from the workplace. And so they are watching to see what's going on and deciding, is this for me? What do I do? What don't I do? How are millennials in the workplace? And they've noticed that millennials, we've heard of millennial burnout. You can burn out at any generation, but millennial burnout is distinct because it's an outcome of a really positive point where young people millennials, when they were young, they wanted to kind of really embody their work and really enjoy it. And there was a passion and a purpose. Was it love what you do and do what you love, or whatever, if that was the right phrase. It was everything to them. And that's great, but you can only do that for so long. And they blurred the edges of what was work and what was outside of work, and what their identity was and what their work was. Everything became rooted in work for many understandable reasons, because it's hard to aspire to other things when, for millennials, the first generation that found themselves unable to achieve the life stages that their parents and generations before them were able to, so that they really focused on work to get there. They wanted to do it. They wanted to get there. Obviously, mass generalization, just to underline that a second. But they threw themselves into it to do it their way, to get to where they wanted to get to. And it resulted in, still lots of millennials haven't bought their first home, and they haven't started the families, and some of them are living with their families rather than moving out. And the progression within the workplace, I talk about the career ladder being broken, because that's what boomers and Gen X were all about. You trust the system, you jump in and you will climb up the ladder and get there. Millennials, the first generation to kind of experience, actually, that doesn't happen for me. Or at least I can climb up the career ladder, but I'm not getting the rewards that other people were getting. It didn't translate. And so Gen Z are coming in quietly, observing, because there's nothing really for them to hang on to. They're not coming in every day. They're not being seen by senior managers. They're not learning by osmosis. They are just working for their paycheck. It's very transactional for them. We're not giving them any culture. We're not giving them, I guess, a sense of progression. So they're looking to see what's going on with millennials. And actually, only 6% of them want a leadership role. 6. That's from Deloitte. And that's just crazy to me, because the whole point of work when I was young was to get on the career ladder, go up the rungs, and you get your rewards. But if you don't want to go up the ladder, if the ladder doesn't exist and you don't want to be a leader because you've seen everyone burn out because of it, what are young people, what do they think work is for? And what do they think work delivers for them? Because it doesn't seem to be the same social exchange as it was before. And that's such an interesting point in history to be at.
Mm. So, do you know the answer to that?
Absolutely not.
No.
I'd be a very rich person if I knew.
Yeah.
But it's, again, looking at the generational lens, it's, we've got AI coming in, which is leading to the workforce becoming more of a diamond. I think in the past it's been very much a pyramid. We'd have lots of sort of cheaper, younger, junior people at the bottom. And then as you became more specialist and more valuable, there would be fewer of you. And at the top, you'd get the CEO. Because of AI, we're seeing that kind of wide base narrowing to create that diamond shape, because a lot of those kind of entry-level roles are being replaced with AI doing the tasks. And I think that kind of that situation is one that we are equating and going, oh, that's fine. But actually, AI doing tasks and a role for a young person in your organisation is quite different. Like, a young person coming into your organisation will become the leadership of your organisation someday. AI doing tasks for you is not in any way building an organisation for you. It's getting things done. And I've been replaced by technology twice already in my career. And I think that the difference is I didn't see that coming, while Gen Z can. So first, when I did my 2 weeks work experience when I was at school, I did it at the local HSBC branch. I just asked them if they'd take me. That was great. I went in, I shadowed someone for 2 weeks, and that person's job was to take the checks that had been paid, stamp paid on them, and file them in a drawer that was just over there. And that was a full-time job for somebody. Wow. Obviously, that doesn't exist anymore. It makes no sense that exists. But it did.
At the time, it did make sense.
But at the time, it made sense, and it was there. And then the second time, it was a holiday job, actually, while I was at university. And I worked for the Financial Times when they just started their website on ft.com. And I looked up passwords for people. So if you'd forgotten your password, you would email me.
It wasn't automated?
No.
Oh, wow.
That was me. In fact, there was a team. We had a team of like 4. We all just looked up passwords and answered queries. Yeah.
Wow.
Back in the day. And it doesn't make sense that exists.
But again, at the time,
what else would you do?
Yeah.
And the point being that, like, it makes sense that they don't exist now. But at the time, like, I didn't see those jobs going away. That was a job. Gen Z are coming into a workplace where everything that they could possibly learn or do or contribute could be taken away at any point. What is it that they're supposed to be doing for an organisation to feel valuable, to contribute, to really be part of the wider workplace? And no one's telling them, and that's because no one knows. Nobody knows.
2 points to that.
Yeah.
That argument. So what do they do to feel valuable? But then on the other hand, referring back to what you said about the broader context and work being transactional, those 2 points sort of seem a bit at odds with each other, because on the one point, if work is transactional, why would they want to be more valuable?
Because that's what's expected. You go. Currently, up until this point, work has delivered the security, the progression, the stability, the money that you need to become an adult. That's what work is. in the UK at the very least. And up until this point, Gen Z have been focusing on employability. You know, they're very, if you look at the education system, it's very much what do you study to and which university do I go to get the job? Like every decision has had that kind of in the background. But if a degree isn't delivering on a job for many reasons, and if the jobs aren't necessarily there and the employers aren't taking you on, graduate roles have, is it Randstad? They just said that a third of all graduate jobs in the last year have gone. So we're down a third in a year for graduate schemes, which it begs the question, is the concept of a graduate trainee program broken? Is that not something that we want? Is that not something that's useful to an organisation? What is the concept of a team? What is the concept of leadership? I'd probably argue that leadership within an organisation, for me, is the point that needs more work. Leadership and management. Leadership, where you're going, what you're doing, what your organisation is for, fine. How you get there, management, line management, team work, I think that's where we've somehow decided that training is informal, training sort of happens, training is accidental, nothing is intentional. And so actually young people, or even anyone joining a new organisation, I don't want to just label young people here, but anyone joining an organisation really struggles with knowing what good looks like at that organisation, how that organisation does the work differently to other organisations, what makes that organisation special. I don't know how that information, that kind of institutional information gets passed down anymore when you're working in a hybrid world. And the answer I have to that is that we need to change the way we manage. It's quite simple. We're trying to get people to do things like we did before the pandemic, and we're in a completely different world, but nobody really wants to look at the situation and recognise that it's management that's broken. Everyone's very keen on saying we've got a Gen Z problem, and I think that's unfair.
So where do new managers come from in this diamond structure?
They're in the middle.
Now they're in the middle.
They're currently in the middle, but the next generation of managers. No, everyone, it seems, is hiring. They're hiring people who have been trained by somebody else. Nobody wants to take on that training responsibility, and that's a big issue for me. Like, no one wants to take responsibility for training. But if you do take responsibility for training, you are in control of your organisation. It's just, we've had so many generations where you're running to be promoted, you're running to manage a team, you're running to be management, which is great. But I don't think any of those people have ever been trained how to manage. Yeah. So they've got sort of decade on decade on decade of people in these management positions, but nobody has been taught how to do it, which means that nobody wants to teach people how to do it because they don't know how to do it, or they don't want to expose the fact that they don't know. So we're sort of in a little circle, and there's a phrase called the incivility spiral, which is a funny old phrase, but being uncivil is the key to it. And what it means in an organisational context is that what an older generation will say that they're having an issue with young people, but then young people will say that the people above them are not managing them very well. And then everyone is just saying that everybody else is the problem, and everyone's making somebody else the villain. Maybe everybody is the villain, maybe everyone's innocent, I'm not sure. But there is this kind of spiral to the bottom that is about blame and stereotype rather than looking at the problem and going, how do we fix it?
Yeah.
Everyone's keen. I guess my provocation is nobody wants to look at the problem. Everyone wants to look somewhere else and pretend that it's somebody else's issue and that they're causing it, rather than actually we're all in it together. We want to make this organization, team, product, brand better. Let's do that. Let's just do it together. It seems like a better way to be working and managing a team. But because of that transactional nature of work, the uncertainty of the future, and there's a lot of job hugging going on at the moment, a lot of job hugging because, you know, what else is out there? Hang on to your job no matter what. People are not doing what's best for the bigger picture.
Yeah. With the point around the transactional nature of work, and you mentioned hybrid working, and that feeds into it. So would part of the answer be ending hybrid working?
No. Because I think, and I say that as my personal view, but also evidence-backed, which I guess is an important thing. Because I think where we're going with work, work isn't about presenteeism anymore. Work is about getting things done.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues that I see a lot is that there's sort of a tension between the methods of getting things done and the principles about what we're getting done. And like the methods of getting things done is coming to the office and doing your work, and I can see you doing it. Or we're having a team meeting so everyone can hear what everybody else is doing, so I know what's going on. Those things work, but are they the most efficient way of getting things done nowadays? Probably not. Is efficiency the most important thing in a workplace? Probably yes nowadays when you've got AI. You want to be using your people power as efficiently as possible because you have this gift that we've all been given to do some of those monotonous tasks a lot quicker than we used to. So AI isn't going anywhere. But, you know, coming to the office or having a team meeting, like what are we doing there? Are we trying to get work done? Are we trying to understand what the team is up to? Would a Slack message do for what you're doing this week? Would kind of having meetings where only the most important people are actually in those meetings? Do we have to be in person for those meetings? There are a lot. I think we need to be questioning how we've always done things. And I think we need to, I guess, think about how hybrid has benefited us and not benefited us. And I think the people who think it doesn't benefit the workplace are ones that don't know how to change. And to be fair, we're not giving them the kind of tools to change. But coming back to things like an open plan office, we've got 13 years of evidence, over 300 studies saying that productivity dies in an open plan office. A recent study said that 1 in 3 young people would rather clean a toilet than ask a silly question in an open plan office to learn how to do things at work. Like, open plan offices are creating a culture where people can't learn rather than
so they may as well not be there.
Yeah, they may as well not be there. What we need to do is figure out how we have intentional conversations, how we give feedback in a way that people can benefit from. Just sending a track change document back to someone and saying, find attached, please send back an update tomorrow is not a way to teach anybody anything. I read a post from Stephen Bartlett, and he said one of the gifts...
He's been on this podcast, actually.
Has he? Yeah. Well, yeah. I've shared a stage with him back in the day, yeah. But, you know, we've had very, very different trajectories. Well, not very different, but, you know, all in the same direction, I would say. But, yeah, different levels. But anyway, he said that early in his career, he had the gift of proximity. And what he meant by that wasn't that he sat next to somebody. It was that he worked for a CEO for a little time in America. And that CEO would narrate his thought process whenever he was talking or doing anything with his team. So he wasn't just giving decisions, he was explaining the pros and cons of what he was evaluating before he came to that thought. If he was pausing in terms of what should we do next, he would pause and say, I'm pausing because this is what I'm thinking about, or I prefer this way over that in the way that you've put it in the document because I think the audience would prefer that, or I think stakeholders will listen to this argument more than that argument. And it's how I love this because it's how I manage, but I think that openness and that the humanness of how decisions and things are produced in the workplace is missing right now. That transactional nature of do this, do that, deadline has, and the lack of training stripped the humanity and the understanding of what good looks like, what the sort of strengths are in what you produce, and why it needs to be great for your employer. It's currently gone, and we just have to figure out how we put it back. It's not. I don't think it's hard.
The answer is not bringing people back into.
No, it's the way we communicate with them.
Do you think that remote and like Slack channels or Teams messages fuel transactional working? Because it's very easy just to be like, "Can you do this?"
Yes,
etc.
Sorry to cut you off.
No,
but yes,
fine.
I was like, yes. yeah, I can. It can be. But I do think that communication is really key here. And there's a really interesting book by Charles Duhigg called Super Communicators. And for me, I really like it because it's quite simple. He says there's 3 types of communication, or 3 types of conversations that people have. So the first is practical conversations, where you're kind of problem solving, and that is kind of the typical workplace conversation that you might have. Then there's the kind of emotional conversation you might have, where instead of solving a problem, maybe you might be wanting to get a hug emotionally. Then there are the conversations that are more about identity, or the kind of social conversations where you want to be heard. Now, the interesting thing is that sort of leadership and management are very familiar with that first kind of practical problem-solving communication at work. I think young people are coming into the workplace not necessarily socialised in the soft skills as much as they should be, and that's not their fault. It's just because they've come into a very uncertain workplace and nobody's teaching them. But they've come in expecting all 3 communication styles at work. They're expecting to be open and to be their own. They're expecting to be able to talk about themselves and their life. They're interested in other people. They're wanting that full picture, and they're wanting to communicate at those 3 different levels. I feel like this. What should I do? Or I'm this kind of person. Does that work for you? Or how can you help me? And helping someone on that kind of personal level, or on a social level, or an emotional level, make some people uncomfortable at work. We need to recognise that communicating in different ways is a strength going forward, especially in the age of AI, and that people can bring lots of different things to the workplace if we just allow them to tell us what they need. And senior leadership are thrown off, confused by the fact that people are wanting to talk sort of about themselves, or to talk about their strengths and weaknesses, or to talk about kind of what works for them, when leadership are only used to saying, well, could you get this done by tomorrow? Could you check this for me? Could you do, which is fine to some degree, but I don't think that works in the long term. I often call that yes, chef, because it works. Yes, chef, I'll get that done. But we are, in the workplace. I'm talking about older people, young people in the workplace. The workplace is full of adults. We have to remember that, and sometimes by talking about young people in the workplace, it kind of you take away their authority and autonomy. They've lived probably independently for 3 years at university. They know how to do all sorts of things. They are in fact adults. And a yes chef does not lead to, firstly, great mental health. I think 8 out of 10 chefs have got bad mental health. But
You're actually talking about chefs now.
Actual chefs, they have quite poor mental health. Unfortunately, it's not a career that you want to go into if you're not mentally strong enough for that. But we're all nobody wants to be shouted at and told what to do like a child, because that's what yes chef is. Like the younger generations coming into the workplace are coming in from a place where they're interested in doing a good job. They kind of do it, but there's no learning in being told what to do. And you kind of get worn down by being told what to do time after time. And if you ask for things, maybe it's in a emotional way or in an identity way that is a conversation that older generations are either unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with. And that's where we are. It's a clash at the moment, when it should be harmony, obviously.
So probably there's no one answer to this, but I know there's an answer. In this, the current times where we're living, what are a couple of practical tips for leaders, and what can they do to engage, inspire their Gen Z workforces?
Thank you. It's good to be asked about solutions, because often, I come onto podcasts or speak on stages and people just want to know about young people, which is fine, but often the things that stick are the differences, and that's not very helpful. So in terms of solutions, I often talk about something called a book of me. And this, it can be a one-pager, it doesn't have to be a book. But it's really to address that communication issue that I was just talking about. So talk about kind of a little bit about who you are, what makes you different, what you want to achieve, how you like to work is another one. Everyone has a slightly different working style, and how you like to communicate. It's very simple, 3 questions. And quite often we get all caught up with setting objectives and then doing end of year reviews and giving feedback in good or bad ways, that we forget to actually ask those questions. And I think they're really important, especially a question about what sort of work, how work fits into your life. I tell an anecdote about someone who could be in your team, earning, 2 people. They're both earning £50,000. So one is 49. So that £50,000 is probably paying a mortgage. They're probably quite comfortable, and they're thinking about their retirement, and that house will ultimately help them with that. A 25-year-old earning £50,000 in your team, they are really good at their job. Earning £50,000 at 25 is amazing. They can't afford a deposit for a studio flat in London. And they're giving you the same quality of work. You're paying them the same money, but outside of work, what you're giving them is doing something completely different. And so it means something different to them as well. The dedication that you get from that 49-year-old will be much higher because you're giving them everything they need in one little package. If you're 25 years old, that's just not the case. And so going back to that point about kind of what work means to people, it's counterintuitive to my generational theory, but you need to think about life stage as well. So where people are at and what work is delivering to them. Generation's great for understanding who they are and how to manage them. And the book of Me is great, but you also need to know what that exchange is doing for them, and then you know how hard or not you can push. Because if you're not giving them everything, pushing them as hard as that person who's getting everything from work is going to have a different impact to their commitment and in the workplace.
Josephine, it's been really, really interesting talking to you. Well, I feel like I've been listening because I'm just really engaged in what you're talking about, and I think there's a lot of your research is really interesting. Equally, I think there's a lot of practical takeaways that leaders can take away from this episode, and certainly things I'll be reflecting on and thinking about as well. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant. Thanks for listening to me.
You're very welcome.